Hey everyone, welcome back to Krat's Couch, and this is my Wrath of the Lich King Classic Phase 1 BIS gearing guide for both Arcane and Fire. In this guide, I'm going to cover a few things. I'm going to cover the different BIS routes you can go for Arcane, the different BIS routes you can go for Fire. I'll also walk through gearing by slot and cover some different options in each slot. And then I'll also cover my thoughts as far as Arcane versus Fire for when we transition to Ulduar in Phase 2. And with that transition, which gearing route I'm leaning towards for each of the different specs so that I can be prepared to play both Arcane and Fire in Ulduar, switching between them depending on the boss and which spec is most optimal for that boss. Before I continue, if you like the content, please hit the like and subscribe, and also catch me live on Twitch at twitch.tv/Kateria and drop me a follow there. That really helps me out tremendously. And also feel free to join my Discord for content discussion, macros, weak auras, and whatnots. The link is in the description. Also, huge shoutouts to Fleep from Wowhead and Mage Discord for sharing his sim work and insights on Phase 1 BIS gearing, as well as many of the members of Mage Discord for all of their great work. So first I want to give an overview of the different routes you can go as Arcane, and the main difference simply has to do with which off-piece you will go. So for Arcane, you can either go with the Helm off-piece, which is the Hood of Rationality, the Chest off-piece, which is the Sanctum's Flowing Vestments, or the Glove off-piece, which is the Gloves of Token Respect. Other than the off-pieces, these routes are all basically the same, with the only difference being that the Gloves off-piece route also uses the Hit Wand, Gemmed Wand of the Nerubians, while the other two routes use the Wand of the Archlich, which drops off kel'thuzad. All three routes are viable and are within 30 DPS of one another, which at 8,000 DPS for a 2-minute fight is pretty much negligible, so you can choose whichever gearing route you like or would work out best for you and your loot situation with your guild. Just to note some of the differences in the routes, the gloves, they're BOE, so if you have a lot of gold, they're purchasable. However, if you go the glove or the chest route, then you need to acquire the tier helm from raid before you'll have tier 7 4-piece. As the other pieces of tier 7 are all purchasable through badges, but there is no version of the tier 7 helm that is purchasable through badges. So the advantage of going the helm route is that you can purchase the other tier 7 pieces with badges, while the other two routes require the tier 7 helm as well as their off piece. So the glove and chest routes can take a little longer to get to that tier 7 4-piece bonus. Again, all three are viable, and the pieces are all relatively the same when it comes to being contested, and the difference will come down to your guild and your raid comp, so talk it over with your loot council and figure out the route beforehand. Later on in the video, after covering Fire, I'll cover which routes for each spec that I'm leaning towards and why, and also my recommendations based on Ulduar release and the possibility of us playing both Arcane and Fire in Ulduar. So check that video section out if you're struggling in your decision of which route to select. So first, for the helm, shoulder, chest, glove, and leg slots, those are all going to be a combination of your off-piece and your tier pieces. So for the helm route, it's going to be your helm as your off-piece, and then the other pieces, all their slots are going to be taken up by your tier 7 pieces, and similarly for chest and gloves, it's going to be the same case. Also keep in mind that you can buy the tier 7 shoulders and legs with valor tokens, and those will be the 25-man version of those tier pieces, and the chest and the gloves you can purchase with heroic badges of justice, but it's only the 10-man version of those pieces. For neck, there's really only one piece, and that's you get it from a quest reward, and that quest is started from a drop that drops off of Saffron. And there's the 25-man version as well as the 10-man version. That they both have similar statting. It's just that the 25-man version has more of those stats, because although it's a guaranteed drop off Saffron every single time, and with running 10-man and 25-man version each week, you should be able to get this eventually, at least one of the versions. For Cloak, the best Cloak is Pennant Cloak by far, which drops off to Sartharian. However, until you can get that, there is the Emblems of Valor Cloak, Disguise of the Kumiho, which is still pretty good until you can get the Pennant Cloak. So get that until you can get Pennant Cloak, and then that's BIS. For bracers, nothing comes close to Unsullied Cuffs, and those drop off of Sartharian. However, they're also pretty contested. So Punctilious Bindings can act as a temporary upgrade until you can get Unsullied Cuffs, but outside of Punctilious Bindings, nothing's better than the Cuffs of Winged Levitation, the pre-raid BIS. So if you have pre-raid BIS and you don't see these as a temporary upgrade, then you're just going to have to wait until you can get Unsullied Cuffs, which are a major step up above Cuffs Winged Levitation. For weapons, Turning Tide is leagues above everything else. So Turning Tide drops off of kel'thuzad in 25-man, and if you compare it to the next best one-hander, Life and Death, which drops off Kothic the Harvester, you can see that the Turning Tide just has way more spell power and way more haste. It's just that much better. However, it's also that much more contested. So not many people will end up with Turning Tide by the end of Phase 1. So definitely have your mind open to other options as far as weapons, because it's very unlikely you'll get Turning Tide, because only a few people are going to get it. There's Life and Death, which is, like I mentioned here, one-hander off Gothic Harvester, still pretty good. If you need hit from your one-hander, then you can, from your weapons, for instance, you can get the Soul Blade or the Haunting Call. Haunting Call is a zone drop in 25-man, and Soul Blade drops off kel'thuzad in 10-man. And then there's also the Damnation Staff, which is drops off 4 Horsemen, 25-man, and it's a staff, and you can see in comparison, stats-wise, not the best. However, it also does get the Enchant Staff, greater spell power, which is plus 81 spell power, so it's a little bit better of an enchant, and that helps make up for a little bit of the downside of it being a staff and not having that offhand option. But suffice to say, you're not probably going to get Turning Tide unless you're, I don't know, the chosen favorite of the Loot Council, or you have a lot of money in a GDK piece. So just have your mind open to other options as far as weapons go. And if you end up going one-hander route, then for offhand, Surplus Limb is definitely best in terms of its itemization and the hit. However, if you don't need the hit, say you're getting the hit from somewhere else for some reason, then Matriarch Spawn off of Mayexna is a good non-hit option. For belt, Leash of Heedless Magic is our BIS. It drops off a 25-man Malygos, and there really isn't that much anything else comparative in terms of an alternative. Singular Polarity is a good alternative if you need hit. However, the Plush Sash of Guzba, our Emblems of Heroism belt, is actually pretty comparable to Cincture of Polarity. So even if you do need hit, you can just use the Heroic Badges belt. And you may need hit because, you know, say you don't have Dying Curse, right? Then that's a lot of the hit to make up for. So that's where you'd be using a belt with some hit on it. Cincture of Polarity is less contested than Leech of Heedless Magic, so there's that advantage. But as far as an endgame BIS set, once you have Dying Curse and other hit items, then you're going to want Leech of Heedless Magic, but it is also contested, so just keep that in mind. For boots, Arcanic Tramplers are our BIS, and there's really nothing that comes close. They're quite a step above Sandals of Crimson Fury, which are our pre-raid BIS. And there is Boots of Forlorn Wishes, but those are just only a little bit better than Sandals of Crimson Fury because Arcanic Tramplers are just that good. Now, that's non-hit options for boots. As far as hit options, if you're going to go the hit route if you needed it, then there's Boots of Impetuous Ideals. Both Boots of Impetuous Ideals and Arcanic Tramplers are BOE, so, you know, if you have a lot of gold, you can buy them, but they're probably going to be very expensive, so just, you know, keep that in mind. I don't recommend going the hit route with boots, even if you need the hit. I would try and get it from different places, mainly because Boots of Impetuous Ideals, again, they're going to be very expensive. And while you can make the justification that, yeah, but if I have these hit boots, then I could use them for fire later on. While that's true, Zintor's Expeditionary boots perform just as well for fire, and you get them from Emblems of Valor. So those are basically going to be free. You'll be able to afford them, you know, at least a few weeks into Phase 1. Certainly before Phase 2 comes out, you'll be able to buy these for fire if you need hit boots for fire. So Boots of Impetuous Ideals are kind of, I don't really recommend them. I just recommend, you know, Boots of Forlorn Wishes if no one needs them, if they're rotting. You can pick those up for a slight upgrade from Sandals of Crimson Fury, and then just go for Arcanic Tramplers for Arcane if you're going to be Arcane for a while, or, you know, just stay at Sandals of Crimson Fury until Phase 2 comes, and if you're going to be going fire, then you can just pick up Zintor's Expeditionary boots, but Arcanic Tramplers are definitely BIS for Arcane. For rings, we have the advantage that Band of Channeled Magic is a Valor token ring, and it's BIS for us, but there's also the disadvantage that Signet of Manifested Pain is really, really good as a ring, but it's also going to be incredibly contested. Pretty much everyone wants this. It drops off 25-man kel'thuzad, and while it's an insane ring, it's going to be super contested. So until you can get Signet of Manifested Pain, if you ever do, then you're basically going to be using your pre-raid BIS options, which are the Band of Guile or the Anhildes ring. Again, I don't recommend the Signet of the Kirintor, as I said in my previous video, because it's just 8,000 gold for something that is only a few DPS higher than Band of Guile and Anhildes ring. It's just not worth it. So, you know, get Band of Channeled Magic, use one of the heroic rings, and maybe you can be one of the lucky few that gets Signet of the Manifested Pain. There really is no other options, unfortunately. For trinkets, we basically have 3 options. We have Embrace of the Spider, Dying Curse, and we also have Illustration of the Dragon Soul. Now, for Arcane, Embrace of the Spider and Dying Curse are BIS. Dying Curse is like #1 prio. I highly recommend putting it as your #1 on your wish list. It's just huge in terms of the hit rating that it gives you, as well as the proc chance, and you're going to want it for going fire later on because of that hit rating. Now, Embrace of the Spider is also better than Illustration of the Dragon Soul in Phase 1 when we have 2-minute fights and 3-minute fights. It sims a fair amount better than Illustration of the Dragon Soul. And then even at longer fights in Ulduar, 5-minute or 6-minute fights, it's simming about the same as Illustration of the Dragon Soul. So as far as Arcane goes, there's no reason to go for Illustration of the Dragon Soul, which is already a very highly contested trinket. And so just go for Embrace of the Spider, which drops off of 10-man Mayexna. And then Dying Curse is, that's going to be a tough one to get. But it's one of the best items for us, especially for the transition to fire, because once we go fire in Ulduar, assuming we do, there's really only one other trinket. So if you got just Dying Curse and Embrace of the Spider, and then you eventually got one trinket from Ulduar to replace Embrace of the Spider, use Dying Curse all the way to TOGC into Phase 3, that'd actually be fine for us. So, try and discuss that with your loot council and be like, hey, if I did get Dying Curse, I would be using it all the way to Phase 3. I wouldn't be replacing it in Phase 2 at all. That could be the case for other classes as well, though. So, it's a very contested item for Dying Curse, but it is just that big for us for both Arcane and Fire. So that's just kind of the way it is. Otherwise, Embrace of the Spider. Just note that when you get Embrace of the Spider, you have to be smarter with your haste. So go back to my watch my Arcane Mage video, and you basically want to, once you have Embrace of the Spider, you're going to not be pre-potting with Speed of Potion anymore. You're going to, or Potion of Speed, you're going to be pre-potting with Wild Magic Pots, and then also you're delaying your Berserking if you're a Troll. So that's just something you have to change up how you're playing with Embrace of the Spider, but it is definitely, it's ahead of Illustration of the Dragon Soul, and so it does have that advantage. Illustration of the Dragon Soul in a speed run may be more consistent, because it's just going to be constantly giving you 200 spell power as long as you can keep it going, which you can with just things like Slowfall or just other simple spells. However, Embrace of the Spider, if you're paying attention to the procs, is going to be better, and yeah, so in Illustration of the Dragon Soul is just very contested, so all things to keep in mind when it comes to trinkets. Lastly, for Wand, it's going to come down to whether you're going the Helm and Chest route or the Gloves route, right? So if you're going the Glove off piece, then you want to have a hit wand, and if you're going the Chest or Helm route, then you're going to want to have a non-hit wand. Keep in mind also, if you had the Drain Eye, then you could go the Gloves route, and you could just not have a hit wand because you have the Drain Eye 1% hit presence. So you just have to always keep in mind your raid situation and what your hit is. But as far as hit wands, Gemmed Wand of the Nerubians is really good. Even if you don't need the hit, it's better than the Pre-BIS, with the Pre-BIS being the Wand of the Demon Soul. However, if you don't need the hit, then Wand of the Archlich is certainly BIS. It's off 10-man kel'thuzad. Something that's about halfway between Wand of the Demon Soul, so our Pre-BIS, and Wand of the Archlich is Fading Glow. That's a 25-man Lotheb. Another just kind of less contested piece, just kind of an upgrade piece. If you're not able to get that BIS, or you just want a non-hit option, you're going with Gemmed Wand of the Nerubians, and this is going to be rotting, then you can have a nice non-hit option by picking up Fading Glow. So that's another alternative, but this is Wand of the Archlich for non-hit wand option, and for hit wand option, you pretty much just have Gemmed Wand of the Nerubians. You could also put a hit gem in your Wand of the Demon Soul, but yeah, Gemmed Wand of the Nerubians, really good for a hit wand. For Fire, there's 2 optimal routes and 2 suboptimal routes that you can go. The 2 optimal routes use Leggings of the Wanton Spellcaster as their off-piece, and the only difference between them is swapping whether you go hit on belt and no hit on boots, or vice versa, you go hit on boots and no hit on belt. The suboptimal routes are accepting that you can't get Leggings of the Wanton Spellcaster due to it being too highly contested since we're Arcane for Phase 1 and thus don't use it as Arcane. And thus you use Tier 7 legs, since they have some hit on them, with hit boots and non-hit belt. And then for your off-piece, you either go Helm, so Hood of Rationality, or you go Shoulders, so Mantle of Dissemination. Basically, either of the optimal routes is fine. They're pretty much equivalent. And while the suboptimal routes are a fair amount less DPS than the optimal routes, they're your best alternative if you can't get Leggings of the Wanton Spellcaster. The Shoulders off-piece is a little better than the Helm route, but the Helm route has the added benefit of being an off-piece for Arcane. As you can see, many of the slots share the same BIS items as I covered for Arcane, so I'm not going to go over those items a second time. So if you're just here for Fire, I'll now cover the slots with items that are different from Arcane BIS, and then for any additional item slots, check the previous timestamps where I talk about the items such as Cloak, Weapon, etc., and you can review those. Also, one other note, just on the Fire stuff, you can see that I spell hit 13%. This is assuming that you then have a Drain Eye to hit that 14%, and if you don't, you can just swap out Lost Jewel with the Horseman Seal from the Halloween event that's coming up here. So be sure to grab this. It's a great piece. I'll talk about it in the ring item slot section, and you can just do that swap and that'll get you to 14%. So now for Fire, I'm going to revisit some of the slots and emphasize some of the different alternatives you have, and especially the ones where they can be more beneficial to Fire versus Arcane. So first, for Bracers, we have the Unsullied Cuffs. Those are still BIS for Fire. However, Bindings of the Expansive Mind have some nice hit on them, so as Fire, you typically need hit, and that's another nice piece, a nice alternative to pick up in case you do need hit. Again, not as good as Unsullied Cuffs, but just another alternative to re-emphasize because of that hit. And then for weapons, Turning Tide is just obviously still, again, leagues over everything else. But for weapons, once again, Fire typically needs all this hit, so you can have look more at some of the one-handers that have hit on them, such as Soul Blade from 10-man kel'thuzad, Hunting Call, there's 25-man Zone Drop, those have hit on them, and you could then use a Offhand with hit as well. There's still, of course, Life and Death and the other options that I covered for Arcane, but then you also have Great Staff of the Nexus, which is from 10-man Malygos, which has a ton of hit on it, and so that's a good way that if you don't have Leggings of the Wanton Spellcaster, you could pick this up in order to replace that hit. Again, Turning Tide with an Offhand is definitely still BIS and much better than this, but this is a nice option that if other people don't need it or something of that sort, you could pick this up in preparation for going Fire in Phase 2. And then for Offhand, Surplus Limb is still BIS, it's just got great stats and it has the hit that Fire needs. However, as a non-hit option, Accursed Spine is actually really good. Even if you need hit, comparing the sims between Surplus Limb and Accursed Spine is only 10 to 15 DPS behind. So, and that's with utilizing all of the hit on Surplus Limb. So Accursed Spine is actually really good for Fire. So this is something that I don't know how contested it will be. Hopefully not very contested, and it's something you could pick up as Fire, and you could use it as a non-hit option, or just save it in your back pocket. Say you had Surplus Limb, you get some more hit options in Ulduar as far as gearing goes, and you can drop some hit somewhere. You could then drop Surplus Limb, swap this in, and it should be a nice DPS increase. So keep your eye out for Accursed Spine. Otherwise, the other things I mentioned for Arcane are still valid options as well, such as Ward of the Violet Citadel for hit is pretty good. And then also, if you happen to get Matriarch Spawn as Arcane, you could certainly use that. But Accursed Spine, good pickup if it's going to be rotting or going very cheap in a GDKP. Then there's also, I've covered Leash of Heedless Magic and kind of how you can go. There's different sets. You can go hit on boots and no hit on belt and vice versa. I definitely like going the hit on boots route because it's basically a free item with it being Emblems of Valor. Cinter's Expeditionary Boots aren't that great for Arcane just because of the way it's statted. But if you need hit as Fire, it's just as good as the Boots of Impetuous Ideals. The BOE ones, which will probably be very expensive, and these are basically free, being Emblems of Valor. So I like going the hit on boots route because then you can just pick these up for free from Fire, and they sim just as good as Boots of Impetuous Ideals. And then you need Leash of Heedless Magic, which is of course a very contested item, that this non-hit BIS belt. However, it's also BIS for Arcane, so it's kind of a twofer in that regard. So that's why I kind of like going this gearing route. Again, it does require Leggings of the Wanton Spellcaster, which are highly contested, but I've covered that in the different sets you can go for Fire, so I'm not going to go into that too much. For rings, it's Signet of Manifested Pain and Lost Jewel are BIS for Fire. So Lost Jewel is not that great for Arcane. It basically sims, I think, a little bit worse, if I remember right, from the Heroic rings. But for Fire, it's actually really good. It sims above everything else by a significant margin, and I don't think it should be that contested based on how it's statted. I could be wrong on that though, but assuming it's not that contested, this should be an easy pickup, and then you would use Lost Jewel and Band of Channeled Magic, our Emblems of Valor ring, until you can get Signet of Manifested Pain, if you ever do. So that's just another difference with Fire compared to Arcane, but it shouldn't be too hard to pick up Lost Jewel, I don't think. Lastly, Trinkets-wise, Illustration of the Dragon Soul and Dying Curse are both BIS for Fire, both highly contested items. So again, I put Dying Curse way above everything else, and way above Illustration of the Dragon Soul or other trinkets, just because of its nature and how it helps with hit gearing, and that's also just really good. The proc is really good as well. With the illustration of the Dragon Soul, you know, getting both probably pretty unlikely for pretty much anyone. For other classes, it's going to be the same boat where they're going to, both of these are BIS, and they're probably not going to be able to get both either. So don't think that you're going to be behind the curve because you don't get both. That's going to be, most everyone's going to be in the same boat. I definitely would try to get Dying Curse over illustration of Dragon Soul. Some people have different thoughts on that, and that's fine. Let those people go illustration of Dragon Soul. You go Dying Curse, because instead of illustration of Dragon Soul, then you can use Sundial. You know, our pre-BIS, the Emblems of Heroism, which is going to be your next best trinket. It's not that much worse than illustration of Dragon Soul. We're talking 50 or 60 DPS, which isn't anything that crazy as far as, you know, fire is concerned. So you could just go Dying Curse and Sundial into phase 2 into Ulduar until you pick up an Ulduar trinket, preferably Flare of the Heavens. We'll get into that with the phase 2 BIS guide, which is going to be down the road. But needless to say, you know, these are the BIS trinkets, but you don't necessarily have to get illustration of Dragon Soul, but Dying Curse is definitely going to really help out your gearing in terms of hit and whatnot. And then for wands, it's similar to Arcane in that the Gemmed Wand of the Nubians is going to be your BIS one as far as hit options, and because fire needs hit, Gemmed Wand of the Nubians is typically the BIS wand that you're going to be looking for as fire. However, if you need a non-hit option, Wand of the Archlich, you know, same as Arcane, it's great for fire as well, but Plague Igniter is also a BIS for fire. It's about as good as Wand of the Archlich for longer fights, which are, you know, that's typically when you're going to be going fire is in Ulduar with longer fights, and Plague Igniter is great for that. So if this is rotting, definitely pick it up. It's actually pretty good. However, if you picked up Wand of the Archlich for Arcane, then yeah, you can just use that as your non-hit option. And then if you need hit, Gemmed Wand of the Nerubians, and typically you need hit, so this is going to be your BIS option. And lastly for rings, there's the Horseman Seal. So this is going to be dropping from the Halloween event coming up here, and I apologize, it doesn't show an 80 upgrade, so I have to just show it here. But this is going to be pretty easy to get during the Halloween event, so I highly recommend grabbing it. It's a great hit ring if you need hit and you don't have a better ring such as Signet of Manifest of Pain, or let's say like Lost Jewel for fire or something, then you could use this, get your hit from the ring, and it's pretty well statted in that regard. It's actually just as good as the hit rings from Next, so definitely recommend getting this, put it in your back pocket, and then you can utilize it if you need some hit. To cover which gearing routes I'm going, I should first say that I'm basing them on the thoughts that in Ulduar, some fights will be better as Arcane, and some others possibly better as Fire. The reason is that Fire has advantages when it comes to fights with more movement and opportunities for cleave, and the longer a fight is, the more the gap shrinks between Arcane and Fire, and there are certainly some longer fights in Ulduar that fit that criteria of movement and opportunities for cleave, such as Freya, Mimiron Firefighter, and Zero Light Yogg. Now, that said, I don't know if Fire will still be better for those fights, because as you can see here, the current sim results show, and also shoutouts to Mecha from Mage Discord for providing these, they show that Arcane is still ahead of Fire even for 6-minute fights in Phase 1 BIS, and it's not until Phase 2 BIS that Fire narrows the gap, but even then, Fire doesn't take the lead until 5-minute fights, assuming that Arcane is getting an innervate. So the thing is, by the time we get Phase 2 BIS, fight lengths in Ulduar will be a lot shorter than when we started out Ulduar, and Arcane mages will probably be able to get an innervate as well. So even by the time we get Phase 2 BIS, Arcane may still be ahead of Fire. Now, that said, movement and cleave are characteristics of some of the fights as I mentioned, so even with Arcane being ahead in Phase 1 BIS gear, Fire could still outperform it depending on the fight. So I personally want to try and be prepared with gearing sets for each spec. There's also something to be said that Arcane will likely require a little more skill and finesse to work well on longer fights, while Fire is easier to play in terms of optimizing it regardless of fight length. So those are all things to consider when selecting your spec and gearing route in preparation for Phase 2. My thoughts are that if you're in a hardcore guild, you should be prepared to play both specs depending on which spec performs best depending on the fight, and we'll know more about that come Ulduar PTR testing. If you're in a more semi-hardcore guild or raid setting, or a more casual guild setting, then it's likely your fight lengths will be a little longer, both during progression and while learning the fights, as well as throughout the phase once you have things on farm. So Fire could be more of a permanent selection for you right off the bat with Phase 2. Additionally, if you're in a raid environment that is more semi-hardcore or casual, you may not be optimizing Arcane on a fight-by-fight basis in order to ensure it's that 500 DPS above Fire, since again, Fire is easier to play optimally for any fight length, so Fire may just make more sense for you and your raid environment right off the bat. So I could certainly consider going Fire right off the bat come Ulduar based on what I just discussed, and thus I would still play Arcane for phase 1, but try and make gearing preparations for Ulduar and work with your guild on that for whatever's going to work best for you. Personally, I like going the gloves route for Arcane and the hit boots route for Fire, because I want to be prepared for both specs, and these routes allow for the most overlap between them. Both routes require the hit wand, and the hit boots are from badges, so they're basically free. Thus, the only extra pieces you need to get for Fire are tier 7 gloves, which will be rotting by the end of the phase, and Lost Jewel Ring, which isn't a contested drop. And then, of course, there's Leggings of the Wonton Dumplings and Illustration of the Dragon Soul. Now, those two pieces are certainly highly contested pieces, so those may be difficult to come by. And if it's going to be impossible to get the leggings within your guild, then it may be better to go the Helm route as Arcane, and the Helm is still pretty decent for Fire, and the tier 7 legs have hit on them, so you can go the tier 7 legs with Helm route as your off piece for Fire. The only issue is that you'll still need the hit wand for Fire, and you won't need that hit as Arcane once you get the other Arcane pieces, but it's still probably the better route if you won't be able to get the leggings. For me personally, I'm planning to go gloves route for Arcane with the optimal hit boots route with the Leggings of Wonton for Fire, but I may pivot if that becomes unrealistic. And that's my Phase 1 BIS guide for both Arcane and Fire, as well as my thoughts on which gearing route to go come the transition to Ulduar with Phase 2 release. Obviously, we'll know more once Ulduar hits the PTR, so be sure to like and subscribe. I'll release more updates on this matter once Phase 2 gets closer, as well as catch me live on Twitch at twitch.tv/Kateria. I really appreciate all of you viewers there immensely. And if you have additional questions, then catch me live on Twitch, or join my Discord and drop them there. The invite link is in the description. Thanks again for watching, and good luck. Hope it helped. Enjoy the bonus clips. Cheers.
Just saying.
These guys hate me. Holy. These guys hate me so much. Holy shit. Holy shit, I wiped all 3 of these dudes.
Son of a biscuit.
Babe, I'm having a blast. I'm sorry.
It's okay.